Everyone. Happy Wednesday. We're so happy to have you here for our third session. We are on session 3 of the turning point. So what are we discussing? The turning point is about the Bob and the Bobbies. And specifically, there is a compilation on theutteranceproject.com. You can look at it. It's really beautiful. Our facilitator here today, the speaker, the presenter, Miss Violetta Zane, she worked on that, and she's here to answer questions that you may have as well. We are on session 3. This is the third session until July 21, 2023, where we'll have our 5th and last session on this subject. We started 2 sessions ago. You're welcome to find the recordings online. We're going to try to post up different places where they are, but for now, we have them on the Clearwater Baha'is page on YouTube and on Facebook. They're also with the Desert Rose Baha'i Institute going to be posting it there, the Firm Foundation Academy posting it. We are all working together under the Desert Rose Baha'i Institute. We are working with the Firm Foundation Academy, and we're working to come together and bring amazing, bright minds who have something really cool to share. And here we are, we're sharing something that you probably may not have been exposed to before, even if you read about who the Bob is. And the majority of the world don't know who the Bob is, but he gave us amazing, amazing writings, a really, truly amazing gift. This gift of spirituality that the world is looking for, really. We're all looking for a spiritual message that really resonates with us. And the Bob, he brought a message that resonated with so many people, so many that were ready to give their lives so willingly for it. Now, who is that person? Violetta has described a few in the previous 2 sessions. We welcome you to look at it, but have no fear. If you're here for the first time, this is a great place to jump in. Violetta is more than happy to answer questions, as we all have shorter memories anyway, so it's good to rehash some important points. So don't hesitate to ask your questions. Without much further ado, we welcome again Violetta. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So nice to see you all. So today we are going to be looking at the Declaration of the Bob. The last 2 days, Monday and Tuesday, we covered the first 3 parts of the chronology, which were the childhood of the Bob and his adolescence, his youth and his work as a merchant in Shiraz and Bushir, his pilgrimage to the Atabat, his meeting with Sayyid Kazim, his marriage to Khadija Begum and how important Khadija Begum is in the history of the faith, and the passing of his infant son, Ahmad. And all of that was the prelude to the Declaration of the Bob, which is often when the story of the Bob begins. And I really wanted to give a larger picture of who the Bob was before this declaration. And now is really the crux of the story, because this is where everything changes. No one's life is ever going to be the same, not the Babs, not Khadija Begum's, not his mother, Fatima Begum, and not Persia's life. So this is really the day of the declaration is the 23rd of May, 1844. But what I want to do is I want to go back 1 year and give you a prelude to the declaration. And I want to start more specifically by speaking with overall the decline of Persia. The Bab was about to make his history-altering declaration as a son of Persia on Persian soil in a country that had been famous for millennia for its glorious and illustrious past. But that was really indeed very much the past. From the beginning of the 19th century, Persia which had been in a slow decline for centuries, began declining at a very, very rapid pace. Government structures began falling apart in the 16th, 17th centuries under the Safavid dynasty, which lasted from 1500 to 1732. And sorry, my neighbor, can you hear that music or not?
No, we don't hear anything.
Okay, good. All right. So I'll just keep talking then, because I can hear it very loudly. So By the mid-19th century, Persia, as described by the hand of the cause, an eminent Baha'i historian, Hassan Balyuzi, had become, quote, materially impoverished, intellectually stagnant, spiritually moribund, spiritually dying. The peasants and farmers of Persia were suffering appalling conditions, and corruption had seeped into every aspect of the government and the country and was destroying it from the inside out. Tyranny and oppression were the norm. State functions and bribery and extortion had become legitimized under the euphemism madakhil, prerequisites, perquisites. Historic sites that had been famous in ancient Persia were falling into ruin, were dilapidated. There was a lot of disease and neglect and insecurity, and so much of that had drastically killed off a large percentage of the Persian population. Historic cities and buildings were just falling apart like the country was falling apart. And there were only 10 million people left in Persia, a kingdom the size of current-day Western Europe, because it was larger than the borders of current-day Iran. Persia had paid the price for a semi-feudal state with the Shah at its head, and also the tyranny of the Shia clerics who had destroyed more and deeper beyond what the government and the corrupt administration had already destroyed. So by 1844, Persia was on life support. And that's the historic background of Persia for the declaration of the Bab. Now, another thing I want to go into a little bit before we go into sort of like the run-up to the declaration is Shia prophecies about the year 60. Because the Bab declared in 1260, in the Hijra Muslim calendar, 1844 in the Gregorian calendar. When the Imam Jafar, remember in his childhood, the Bab had a dream of the Imam Jafar on a scale, and an invisible hand had placed him on the scale, and he had gone so high, he had come down to the ground. He had been heavier than the Imam Jafar. This Imam was the sixth Imam of Shia Islam. When someone asked the Imam Jafar about the year when the Qaim would be made manifest, he answered, "Verily, in the year 60, his cause shall be revealed, and his name shall be noised abroad." There was a very famous Andalusian Muslim scholar. He was a mystic, he was a poet, a philosopher. His name was Ibn Arabi, and he was very influential within Islamic thought. His name was Muhyiddin Arabi, Muhyiddin meaning the reviver of religion. And he was considered a saint by some Muslim scholars. He was prolific, and he wrote about 850 works. When he was asked about the return of the Promised One, he left several prophecies, which are the following about the country of origin of the Qaim: the ministers and upholders of his faith shall be of the people of Persia. Ibn Arabi left a prophecy about the name of the Bab, Sayyid Ali Muhammad, by giving the order of his names. In his name, the name of the guardian, Ali, precedeth that of the prophet, Muhammad. And this image that you see here on your screen right now is actually an image of Sheikh Ibn Arabi, overlaid over some of his texts. He also prophesied the year of the Bab's declaration by indicating 1260 is half of 2520. So what he said was the year of his revelation is identical with half of that number, which is divisible by 9, 2520. Now, another very well-known figure in Shia Islam is Mirza Muhammadi Akhbari, an 18th century jurist, an expert in hadiths, Islamic traditions, those that are not in the Quran. He was the founder of the Akhbari school of Shia Islam, and he was very well respected for his learning. He wrote poems relating to the year of the manifestation of the promised Qaim, and he made the following prediction using the Arabic numerical value of the word Qars, which equals 1260, to identify the year of his advent. So when he says Qars, he means 1260, which is 1844. He said, in the year Qars, so 1260, 1844, the earth shall be illumined by his light, and in Gharsahi, 1265, the world shall be suffused with his glory, 5 years later. If thou livest until the year Gharasi, 1270, so 10 years after his declaration, that means 1854, thou shalt witness how the nations, the rulers, the peoples, and the faith of God shall all have been renewed, which also coincides with the revelation, the declaration of Baha'u'llah. Imam Ali was the last of the four caliphs who are called the rightly guided caliphs. And he ruled Islam in the 7th century, immediately after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And he was the first Shia Imam. He used the same symbolic word of the use of the word Gharz to indicate the year 1260. In Gharz, the tree of divine guidance shall be planted. So in 1843, 1 year before his declaration, the Bab had a dream that was very powerful and very spiritually significant, that indicated to him that he was a manifestation of God. And the Bab recounted this dream in a very short tablet that he revealed in the year 1844, which is known formally by the name Tablet Revealed in the Year 60. And this is the tablet. The spirit of prayer which animates my soul is the direct consequence of a dream which I had the year before the declaration of my mission. In my vision, I saw the head of the Imam Hussein, the Sayyidush Shuhada, Prince of Martyrs, which was hanging upon a tree. Drops of blood dripped profusely from his lacerated throat. With feelings of unsurpassed delight, I approached that tree and, stretching forth my hands, gathered a few drops of that sacred blood and drank them devoutly. When I awoke, I felt that the Spirit of God had permeated and taken possession of my soul. My heart was thrilled with the joy of his divine appearance, and the mysteries of his revelation were unfolded before my eyes in all their glory. So we're going to go to Karbala to give you a little prelude to the declaration and what's happening in Karbala that's going to lead to Mullah Hussein making his way to Shiraz. So I want to focus on two separate people in Karbala, Tahirih and Mullah Hussein. I'm going to give you a little bit of what is going on in their lives as the declaration is approaching. So Tahirih had become a follower of Sayyid Kazim at some point during the 13 years when she had lived in Karbala with her husband between 1828 and 1841. When she returned to Qazvin, her conversion to Shaykhism, which was very ardent, became a source of tension and conflict with her family. And in 1843, 2 years after coming home to Qazvin, she found a way to convince her family to let her return to Iraq to meet, finally, Sayyid Kazim, who she had never met in person. Tragically, Tahirih arrived in Karbala 10 days after Sayyid Kazim's passing. She formed a very strong bond with Sayyid Kazim's widow, and she provided Tahirih with Sayyid Kazim's unpublished manuscript. She allowed Tahirih to keep teaching classes to the Shaykhis inside her house, as Sayyid Kazim had done. So she effectively replaced Sayyid Kazim. And she gained a wide and popular following. And in obedience to Sayyid Kazim's instructions, Tahirih spent time in prayer, fasting, and meditation, which was what Sayyid Kazim had told his followers to do to prepare for the imminent advent of the promised Qa'im. And one night she dreamt of a youth, a Sayyid in a black coat and a green turban, who was floating in the air and reciting verses, praying with his hands held up. Tahirih immediately awoke from her dream and ran to write down the verses that this blessed Sayyid had spoken in her dream. And no one so far has been able to identify which these verses were, which has been confirmed by letters from the research department. When Tahirih later learned that her brother-in-law, Mirza Muhammad Ali Ghazvini, was about to leave Karbala in search for the promised one, and now her brother-in-law is going to become a letter of the living, the 16th letter of the living to be precise, and she is going to become the 17th. So when she heard that he was going to accompany Mullah Hussein, she gave him a sealed letter to give to the Qa'im and asked him to deliver a verbal message in the form of a poem on her behalf. And the first part of the message was, "The effulgence of thy face flashed forth, and the rays of thy visage arose on high. And after this, Tahirih asked her brother-in-law to speak the following words: "Am I not your Lord? Thou art, we will all reply." Now, Mullah Hussein was Sayyid Kazim's most faithful disciple. He was in his 30s, and he had two really important attributes. He was a really deepened scholar. He had a profound scholarship, and he had an unbending will, but he had a spirit that made him stand apart from the rest of Sayyid Kazim's disciple. He had an unquenchable thirst for learning, and he never rested. He was a man of intense determination, and he was always looking for a new challenge, and was very knowledgeable about the Shaykhi teachings. In fact, so knowledgeable, it was widely accepted that he would be the successor of Sayyid Kazim after the former's passing. Sometime in 1843, Sayyid Kazim sent Mullah Hussein to Persia on a mission, and he accomplished this mission and returned to Karbala on the 22nd of January, 1844, only to find that he arrived 3 weeks after his beloved teacher's death. So Tahirih arrived 10 days after his death, and Mullah Hussein arrived 3 weeks after his teacher's death. Mullah Hussein received continuous visits from mourners for Sayyid Kazim for about 3 days. And then after that, he gathered his teacher's leading disciples, and he asked them, what were Sayyid Kazim's last wishes? What did he say? And they unanimously reported that Sayyid Kazim had told them one and all clear instructions. And they were this: the object of our quest was now revealed. The veils that intervened between you and him are such that only you can remove by your devoted search. Nothing short of prayerful endeavor, purity of motive, singleness of mind will enable you to tear them asunder. Hast not God revealed in his book, whoso maketh efforts for us, in our ways we will guide them? Mullah Hussein immediately understood, and he reprimanded his fellow disciples and said that your first obligation, as well as mine, is to arise and carry out, both in the spirit and in the letter, the dying message of our beloved chief. He wasn't able to rouse his fellow students to leave their homes and accompany him, but he left Karbala accompanied by his brother and his nephew, both 20 years old, just barely, and they had been at his side since they left Persia together. And on the 22nd of February, 1844, Mullah Hussein and his brother and nephew went to the Masjid-i Kufi, an old and kind of falling into ruins mosque, but it's a very important mosque outside of Karbala. And they spent 40 days in prayer and meditation, spiritually preparing themselves for their important quest. In April 1844, when Mullah Hussein ended his retirement, he left for Najaf with his brother and his nephew and headed southeast to the Persian Gulf, where he boarded a ship bound for Bushir, where the Bab had practiced his commerce in Persia. Mullah Hussein soon left the port city with his brother and nephew, and he was drawn as if by a magnet towards Shiraz. So now we're going to talk about how the Bab prepared his wife, Khadija Begum, for the coming changes in their lives. So the reason why this vignette is called On or After 4th of April, 1844, is because the Bab, when the Bab goes on pilgrimage, in a few months from the moment that we are now at, as soon as he hears that Baha'u'llah has accepted his message, he goes on pilgrimage. He was waiting to hear that Baha'u'llah had become a Babi. And when he goes on pilgrimage, he's going to travel between Mecca and Medina. And in between Mecca and Medina, he's going to reveal an epistle called the Sahifi Bainali Hamarain, the epistle between two shrines, literally. And in this epistle, the Bab specifically dates the moment he received the first revelation from God that he was a manifestation of God. And this is where that is. The quote is, "In truth, the first day that the Spirit descended in the heart of this servant was the 15th of the month of Rabiul Aval. 4th of April, 1844 is the first time the Bab received the message from God. So the story of Khadija Begum witnessing the Bab in a state of revelation from God when he is illumined, it cannot have happened before the 4th of April, because that is the first time that he received a revelation. Now, we assume that he must have, the revelation from God must have come more and more intensely as the time approached to the 23rd of May. So he must have been in this state of transfiguration several times between the 4th of April and the 23rd of May. And so at one point during this state of transfiguration that the Bab experienced before the declaration, this is when Khadija Begum saw him. It's between the 4th of April and the 23rd of May. So one day, before the 22nd of May, 1844, the Bab returned home at dusk, earlier than usual, and he told Khadija Begum, tell Fize, the African lady servant, to prepare whatever we are having for the evening meal sooner than usual. Tonight, I have a particular task to attend to. Fize was informed, and about an hour and a half later, the family ate dinner in Fatime Begum's room. Then Fize brought the Bab some water for him to wash himself and his hands, and they spread out the bedding, and she returned to her own quarters, and the Bab retired for the night. Later that same night, around midnight, when the house was quiet and everyone had gone to sleep, the Bab rose from bed and left the room. And at first, Khadija Begum was not worried. But then the Bab did not return for more than an hour, and she became concerned. So she went out looking for her beloved husband. She looked in the lavatory, checked the bedroom of Fatime Begum, and then thinking that for some reason he might have just left the house and gone into the city, she went and checked the street door, but the street door was locked. So the Bab was somewhere in the house, but she couldn't find him. Khadija Begum walked to the western side of the house, and she looked at the rooftop, and she saw the upper chamber in the eastern side of the house was bathed in light. And it really caught her by surprise, because there was so much light in that room that it looked to her like it had been illumined with 1,000 lights. And she had never seen the Bab go to that part of the house at that hour of the night, unless he was entertaining guests. And whenever he was entertaining guests, he would tell her ahead of time. And he had not done that this evening. So very soon after this, and still the same night, she's utterly astonished. And at the same time, she's a little bit apprehensive. And Khadija Begum goes up the stairs at the northern side of the courtyard, which lead to the room. And when she entered, she found that the room was lit so brilliantly that it dazzled her eyes. But really, in fact, there was only a single lamp in the upper chamber. And then she saw her husband standing in the chamber, facing the Qibli, his hands raised heavenwards, and he was intoning a prayer in the most melodious voice, tears streaming down his face. Khadija Begum saw the Bab standing with an air of indescribable majesty and resplendence. Her husband's face was illumined, rays of light radiating from his face, and Khadija Begum was standing transfixed, staring at this heavenly being. She was seized with awe and became shaking uncontrollably, and she found that she could no longer move and that her willpower had disappeared. She couldn't enter the upper chamber, but she also could not go back down the steps of the stairs. She felt like she was on the verge of losing consciousness when the Bab made a gesture with his hand and spoke to her and said, "Go back." The simple movement of the Bab's hand released Khadija Begum from the state that she was in, and she went back down into the house, returned to her room, and went to bed. But she was so affected by what she had just seen that she remained deeply disturbed and spent a sleepless night visualizing the scene over and over again in her mind, she kept asking herself, what could possibly have happened that would have caused such tears to flow down his face and prompted such heartbreaking prayers and supplications? And that night, her life had already changed forever. And she communed with God and said, "Oh God, what power and grandeur, what greatness and glory. What is the wisdom in your revealing to me that effulgent sun? Is he my Sayyid Ali Muhammad? Will I henceforth be able to live with that luminous sun? Nay, nay, the rays of this resplendent sun will consume me and will reduce me to ashes. I possess not the power to withstand it." So after this sleepless night, it was the morning, and it came time for Khadija's acceptance, and this is how it happened. Khadija Begum was filled with anxiety when dawn finally broke, and she heard the muezzin's call to prayer from the mosque that was adjacent to their house. Fizi brought the samovar and tea things into Fatima Begum's room, and as usual, they went into his mother's room for his morning tea. Khadija Begum followed the Bab inside. Fatima Begum had stepped out of her room at that moment, and the Bab and Khadija Begum were alone. As soon as her eyes fell on her holy husband, she saw that same attitude and majesty she had seen the night before. She grew pale and she shivered involuntarily. The Bab was quietly drinking his tea, and he raised his face towards his wife with great kindness and affection and asked her to take a seat, and then gave her the rest of the tea in his own cup, which she drank. And his kindness restored Fatima Begum's courage. When the Bab asked what was troubling her, Khadija Begum courageously replied that it was the change in him that weighed so heavily on her mind. "You are no longer the same person I knew in our childhood. We grew up together. We have been married for 2 years, living in this house, and now I see a different person before me. You have been transformed." Khadija Begum added that this made her feel anxious and uncomfortable. The Bab smiled and said that although it hadn't been his wish for her to see him in the state he had been in the night before, God had decided otherwise, telling Khadija Begum the entire truth about his station before his official declaration to Mullah Hussein. "It was the will of God that you should have seen me in the way that you did last night, so that no shadow of doubt should ever cross your mind, and you should come to know with absolute certitude that I am a manifestation of God, whose advent has been expected for 1,000 years. This light radiates from my heart and from my being." Khadija Begum herself described the state of her soul when, at the moment that she heard these words from her own husband, who was now a manifestation of God. "As soon as I heard him speak these words, I believed in him. I prostrated myself before him, and my heart became calm and assured. From that moment, I lived only to serve him, evanescent and self-effacing before him, no thought of self ever intruding." Now, with this new station as a manifestation of God come sufferings, and the Bab prepared his wife for these adversities. Khadija Begum stands alone with Tahirih among all of the women of her generation in her instant, radiant, complete acceptance and acquiescence of the Bab station. For years in dream and in life, Khadija Begum had been certain of the great destiny of the Bab. As the time for his declaration approached, the Bab was receiving revelation which transfigured his very being. At this moment, so close to the Bab's imminent declaration, Khadija Begum became increasingly aware of her husband's spiritual power, but she was unaware of the exact nature of his claim and his mission. the Bab confided the secret of his future sufferings to Khadija Begum. He unfolded to her eyes the significance of the events that would soon begin to take place in Persia, but asked her not to share these with his mother. So now we're getting closer, because we're going to look at this section here is dedicated to what happens the day right before the declaration. So I'm going to start with just things I discovered that I did not know, and I want to share them with you because they were new to me. And then I'm going to explain to you why I've not included them in this chronology. So Hand of the Cause Hassan Balyuzi tells a story on page 8 of Eminent Baha'is in the Time of Baha'u'llah about the Bab in Karbala hearing Mullah Hussein recite lines from a poem by Sheikh Ahmadi Ahsai at the request of Sayyid Kazim, an event that was so moving that it caused the Bab to weep very deeply, and the entire gathering was affected. This story is also quoted in another eminent historian named Feridun Vahman, who edited the Bab in the Babi community of Iran, chapter 1, the Bab, a sun in a night not followed by day. In the same book on page 166, our very beloved Dr. Abbas Amanat, who wrote Resurrection and Renewal, he states that Mullah Hussein must have arrived in Shiraz in mid-May 1844, not on the 22nd of May, as we always say. He states, Dr. Amanat, that it is likely that the Bab knew Mullah Hussein was coming before he arrived. And he, Dr. Amanat, considers that the Bab and Mullah Hussein were acquainted prior to the night of the declaration. So in Resurrection and Renewal, on page 169, Dr. Amanat quotes Mullah Hussein speaking to Mullah Muhammad Hassan Bushrui, one of the very few survivors of the Sheikh Tabarsi, stating that his interviews, so this is Mullah Hussein speaking, saying that his interviews took place over 3 nights, not in the course of a single night. And Dr. Amanat quotes Mullah Hussein's words. So anyway, so these things, they are some of what some historians are saying. But for the purposes of my chronology, I prefer to go with the story that we know from the Dawnbreakers, because Shoghi Effendi translated it, and Shoghi Effendi never approached these issues of whether or not Mullah Hussein met the Bab before, which is possible if they met or they interacted. And it's possible that this was 3 nights and not just 1 night. But I have a rule when I write history, Baha'i history, is I always go with Shoghi Effendi's version. And I wanted to share this with you to show you, basically my purpose is not to confuse you. It's to show you how vibrant and dynamic and open-minded Baha'i historians are, and that they're always searching and they're trying to figure out new things. And there's these different things that are there, and Baha'i historians can hold those things in their minds, and we don't really know exactly, but we know that the Guardian, who is infallible, wrote this story. And so that's what I'm going to go through, is the timeline we all know, where Mullah Hussein arrives on the 22nd of May, and the declaration night is 1 night, not 3 nights. I hope that wasn't too confusing, or it was of some interest to some of you. So on the day before the declaration, the Bab informs Khadija Begum that he is going to have a special guest. And he says exactly that. He said, "Tonight we will entertain a dear guest." Khadija Begum was very eager to hear what the Bab had to say to his guest, but he turned to her and said, "It is better if you go and sleep." Khadija Begum obeyed the Bab, but she would not be able to sleep. We're going to read about her experience of the declaration night after it happens. So I will come back to Khadija Begum. So in the afternoon of the 22nd of May, 1844, and these are fields outside of Shiraz. So this is sort of kind of the general look of what it was, where Mullah Hussein met the Bab. So on the afternoon of the 22nd of May, 1844, Mullah Hussein finally stood at the gates of Shiraz, and he asked his brother and nephew to go find lodging at the mosque of Il-Khani. And he stayed behind and spent some time walking alone in the fields outside of the city. And he was really just thinking about his quest, his search for the promised one. And he was now in Shiraz, which he'd been called to. It was a hot afternoon, and Mullah Hussein was exhausted from the long journey. And as he kept walking and pacing, he came face to face with a striking youth wearing a green turban. He was a Sayyid, a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. And this young man was gentle and gracious and greeted him with great kindness and a welcoming smile. Mullah Hussein soon found himself being embraced as though they were lifelong friends. And he thought the Bab was one of Sayyid Kazim's disciples who'd heard he had arrived. And he was very overwhelmed by such an unexpectedly warm welcome. And immediately after, the Bab invited Mullah Hussein to his home for dinner that night to be his guest. And he said, no, I've left my nephew and my brother behind. But the young Sayyid, the Bab, replied, commit them to the care of God. He will surely protect and watch over them. So the Bab, accompanied by his new friend, Mullah Hussein, arrived at the gate of a modest home, and they knocked on the door, and our friend, Haji Mubarak, the Bab's Ethiopian servant, let them in. The Bab crossed the threshold and invited Mullah Hussein in with penetrating power and majesty as he uttered these words, enter therein in peace, secure. Mullah Hussein was very deeply moved by Shiraz, moved by what he was feeling, moved by this youth, moved by the way in which the Bab had invited him, by the words he had just spoken. And he just thought, entering this house, this is just a good sign for my search. He had no reason to suspect that the object of his quest he was in the house of the object of his quest. He just thought this is boding well. And this image, of course, is the front door of the Bab's house in Shiraz. So from afternoon to sunset on the 22nd of May, 1844, Mullah Hussein joined the Bab in the upper chamber of the house. And he began to feel an indescribable sense of joy walking through the Bab's house, feeling his entire being. They took seats in the upper chamber, and the Bab invited Mullah Hussein to perform his ablutions, and he himself poured the water over his hands. And then he prepared and offered Mullah Hussein a cup of tea. The Mullah Hussein was trying to leave, but the Bab always kept him at his side, saying, you must surely have made the hour of your return conditional upon the will and pleasure of God. It seems that his will has decreed otherwise. You need have no fear of having broken your pledge. So he was so dignified and self-assured that he calmed Mullah Hussein down, and they both did their ablutions, and they both said their evening obligatory prayers side by side. And it was at that time that Nabil in the Dawnbreakers tells us that Mullah Hussein whispered a prayer to God on his breath as he was praying with the Bab. He whispered, he said, I have striven with all my soul, O my God, and until now have failed to find thy promised messenger. I testify that that word faileth not, and that thy promise is sure. Begging God basically to guide his steps to the object of his quest. And now we come to the night of the declaration. So 1 hour before, and this is going to be really like it's been up till now, like hour by hour. This is what it's going to be like for the whole declaration. 1 hour after sunset on the 22nd of May, 1844, the Bab began speaking with Mullah Hussein. So this is a dialogue that comes from the Dawnbreakers. Yeah, this is Dawnbreakers dialogue. So the Bab asks Mullah Hussein, whom after Sayyid Kazim do you regard as his successor and your leader? Well, at the hour of his death, our departed teacher insistently exhorted us to forsake our homes, to scatter far and wide in quest of the promised beloved. I have accordingly journeyed to Persia, have arisen to accomplish his will, and am still engaged in my quest. Has your teacher given you any detailed indications as to the distinguishing features of the promised one? Yes. He is of pure lineage, is of illustrious descent, and of the seed of Fatimeh. As to his age, he is more than 20 and less than 30. He is endowed with innate knowledge. He is of medium height, abstains from smoking, and is free from bodily deficiency. The Bab paused for a while and declared in a vibrant voice, "Behold, all these signs are manifest in me." And the Bab proceeded to demonstrate, one by one, each of the characteristics were applicable to him. Mullah Hussein was very, very, very surprised by the Bab's claim and politely observed, "He whose advent we await is a man of unsurpassed holiness, and the cause he is to reveal, a cause of tremendous power. Many and diverse are the requirements which he who claims to be its visible embodiment must needs fulfill. How often has Sayyid Kazim referred to the vastness of the knowledge of the Promised One? How often did he say, my own knowledge is but a drop compared to that with which he is endowed. All my attainments are but a speck of dust in the face of the immensity of his knowledge. Nay, immeasurable is the difference." And as soon as Mullah Hussein had spoken, he felt just seized with fear and remorse in a way that he couldn't explain why he was feeling ashamed and remorseful and fearful, but he couldn't even hide it from the Bab either. So it must have been very awkward for him because the Bab just said these signs are manifest in me, and he just lectured a manifestation of God. And so that's probably why he's feeling that fear and shame and remorse. So he immediately decided to change his attitude and soften his tone. And I think all of us could take a page from Mullah Hussein's book in terms of softening our attitudes. And, whenever a conflict arises, instead of letting it escalate, try to de-escalate, change your attitude and soften your tone. I think that's wonderful advice. So 1 hour after sunset, and for you especially, I have found a picture 1 hour after sunset. Well, maybe not 1 hour, but like sunset in Shiraz over the house of the Bab. So 1 hour after sunset on the 22nd of May begins a sort of, I guess, a test. I mean, Mullah Hussein is going to test the Bab. I mean, he softened his tone, but he's still going to test manifestation of God. But he had a long time to think when he was traveling from Iraq to Iran to Persia. And he had two standards that he thought, this is how I'm going to find the promised one. The first standard is that he is going to be able to unravel these very mysterious, complicated, hidden illusions in a treatise on a very obscure hidden teaching of Sheikh Ahmadi Ahsai and Sayyid Kazimi Rashti. And the second standard by which he could definitely say, yes, this is the promised one, was that he would reveal without hesitation or reflection a commentary on the Surah of Joseph in a completely new style and language. And even Sayyid Kazim had refused this second test, saying, this is verily beyond me. He, that great one who will come after me, will, unasked, reveal it for you. That commentary will constitute one of the weightiest testimonies of his truth and one of the clearest evidences of the loftiness of his position. So this is very important here. Sayyid Kazim refused to reveal a commentary on the Surah of Joseph in a new style and language at the request of Mullah Hussein. He said, I cannot do this. The Bab will do this. The Qaim will do this. And not only will he do this, but he will do it unasked. And not only will he do it unasked, but this commentary will become one of the weightiest testimonies of the proof of his mission. And that's the Qayyumul Asma. So now you're thinking, well, how can he possibly know this? How did he know how to describe the Bab? How does he know this is going to happen? How does he know he's going to reveal it unasked? And this is one of these mysteries, my friends, because Sayyid Kazim was not a prophet. But you can see in this that he is divinely guided. So Mullah Hussein was thinking about these two standards, and the Bab spoke again. And he said again, the Bab, we don't really think about what kind of personality he had, because he was martyred and he was in prison for so long. And that's why I wrote this chronology, because the Bab is not what we think he is. He's not always very soft-spoken. Like now, Mullah Hussein's thinking, how am I going to test this person? How am I going to test him? How am I going to know if he's the promised one? And the Bab just says, observe attentively. Might not the person intended by Sayyid Kazim to be none other than I? That's extremely direct, very direct. At this point, Mullah Hussein decided to present the Bab with the first test, which is this like really obscure thing. So will you read this book of mine and look at its pages with indulgent eyes? I pray you to overlook my weaknesses and failings. But he's tarofing. He's like, oh, I'm so weak. I have failings. But this is a test to a manifestation. It's a very complicated thing. He knows it's complicated. He knows it's abstruse. He knows it's well written. He knows it's extremely theologically complex, but he pretends like it's not. He's like, look at these little pages that I wrote. It's nothing, but I'm so weak. And so the Bab graciously receives the treatise, and he starts to look through it, and he opens the book, and he glances at the passages, and after a few minutes, he closes the book and he begins to address Mullah Hussein with this characteristic vigor and charm. And so that's something that's really important to really have in mind. The Bab is he's not a very shy, soft, like calm. No, he's a vigorous, brilliant, direct, unafraid, courageous, eloquent. He has an instant repartee. Whenever anybody talks to him, the Bab is in debates. The last thing you want in your life is to be in a debate against the Bab, because he's so eloquent. But he is, like we saw in the first 2 or 3 parts of here, he's extremely courteous. So you have to wrap all of that vigor and intellect and brilliance in like absolute courtesy. Never rude, but never pretending that he doesn't know, never pretending he is not who he is. He even told his wife, I am the promised one of 1,000 years. A month before Mullah Hussein even set foot in Shiraz, So the Bab goes over and over and over and over this thing that the Mullah Hussein tried to trick him with, and he goes on so deeply. He goes even further and deeper in his expounding. He brings out more refreshing and powerful truths that Mullah Hussein had never heard. They were not in a single hadith. I mean, Mullah Hussein knew all the hadiths. What the Bab was saying was not hadith. This was something new. It wasn't the hadith, and it wasn't the writings of Sheikh Ahmad or Sayyid Kazim. This is something completely new. And the Bab addresses Mullah Hussein. And just listen to the words of the Bab and make your own mind as to what kind of person speaks this way. Had you not been my guest, your position would indeed have been a grievous one. The all-encompassing grace of God has saved you. It is for God to test his servants, and not for his servants to judge him in accordance with their deficient standards. Were I to fail to resolve your perplexities, could the reality that shines within me be regarded as powerless? Or my knowledge be accused as faulty? Nay, by the righteousness of God, it behooves in this day the peoples and nations of both the East and the West to hasten to this threshold and here seek to obtain the reviving graces of the merciful. Whoso hesitates will indeed be in grievous loss. Do not the people of the earth testify that the fundamental purpose of their creation is the knowledge and adoration of God? It behooves them to arise as earnestly and spontaneously as you have arisen, and to seek with determination and constancy their promised beloved. And then, in fulfillment of the prophecy of Sayyid Kazim, unbidden, unasked, unprompted, the Bab says these historic words: now is the time to reveal the commentary on the Surah of Joseph. And friends, No religion can say this. We know the very minute that the Baha'i dispensation was born. 2 hours, 11 minutes after sunset on the 23rd of May, 1844. And this hour and minute is given to us by the Bab himself. The Bab was very precise. This is one of the things I learned when I was writing this. The Bab precisely dated the first time that he received the revelation from God. He precisely timed the minute, hour, minute, and day of his revelation of the Surah of Joseph. He revealed 2 tablets that were index tablets that wrote the dates of the revelation of his tablets and surahs and commentaries and epistles and books. He has 2 of these that are in his own hand, where he says, I revealed this tablet on this day, this tablet on this day, this tablet. And there are small changes between the 2. There's 6 months between the 2. So he was an extremely precise man, manifestation of God. Sorry. He was very, very, very precise. And it's absolutely incredible. So this is what, I'm not going to read this. You can go to the chronology and find this quote where the Bab shares that it's the minute and hour on the Qayyum al-Asma. So the Bab took up his pen and with incredible speed revealed the entire first chapter of his commentary on the Surah of Joseph, which we know as the Qayyum al-Asma. And as he was revealing the holy verses, the Bab gently intoned them, but he did not pause, slow, or interrupt the flow of revelation that streamed from him until the chapter was completed. The whole first chapter was revealed in one go. Mullah Hussein sat completely enraptured by the magic of the Bab's voice and the power of his revelation. And when he rose to go back to the mosque where his nephew and brother were staying, the Bab asked him to sit down. If you leave in such a state, whoever sees you will assuredly say, this poor youth has lost his mind. So you see in this exchange that the revelation of God onto the manifestation of God has repercussions in the atoms that are around him, because the people around him are affected. Mullah Hussein was visibly affected. Khadija Bagum, who saw him in transfiguration, was visibly affected. So this is something that you should know. This power is not ethereal, it's not intangible, it's actually physically real. Why do you think that we bury manifestations of God in shrines and go pray there? Because their dust is powerful. Their dust was the receptacle of the revelation of God, the Holy Spirit, the descent of the Holy Spirit. So all the saints and all the prophets, and all the letters of the living and the hands of the cause and the manifestations of God, all of those souls of the purest, most holiest people that have ever walked this earth, and manifestations of God and angels, they circle around the shrine of the Bab. And when the Shoghi Effendi was explaining this to a pilgrim, the pilgrim thought, well, then who's left to circle around the shrine of Baha'u'llah? And as soon as he said that, the eyes of the guardian turned on him and said, and around the shrine of Baha'u'llah, all the souls of the holy ones and manifestations of God of the past and the soul of the Bab circle. So, this is a chronology about a manifestation of God. Like these mystical things, we have to think of them. So important. That's the basis of our faith. This is the moment that this Baha'i dispensation that's going to be around for 5,000 centuries was born. The Bab spoke to Mullah Hussein and anchored the historic moment into his mind and into our minds for all time by saying, this night, this very hour, will in the days to come be celebrated as one of the greatest and most significant of all festivals. Render thanks unto God for having graciously assisted you into attaining your heart's desire, and for having quaffed from the sealed wine of this utterance. Well is it with them that attained thereunto. So now, you remember I told you I was going to tell you about this. So when the Bab was about to receive Mullah Hussein, he broke his routine. He had dinner much earlier. He went to bed way earlier. He told his wife to also go to bed and not to wake up because he had a special guest, but she had to sleep. And she did obey him. But the thing is, she could hear everything that was happening. So it's just like she tried to disobey the Bab. She just heard, So Khadija Bagun did go to bed, but she could hear the Bab's voice talking, his blessed voice talking to Mullah Hussein, chanting verses, presenting proofs, offering arguments. And every day from that day forward, the Bab would entertain a new, previously completely unknown person in their home. And every day he would speak to them in that same way, the proofs, the chanting verses, and the arguments. These people were the letters of the living. And we're going to look at them in the next part. So immediately after the declaration, so really the morning after the day, the third hour after sunset on the 22nd of May, 1844, Mullah Hussein has dinner with the Bab. Haji Mubarak, who, he's going to have, he has a huge role. He met all the letters of the living. He's the one who let them all in. He's the one who prepared all the tea for them, prepared all the food for them, then accompanied these bewildered people after. You have to understand that for each of them, most probably, they were hit with this is the manifestation of God. So 17 different people, because Tahira never met him. So 17 different people came and were affected by the manifestation of God. And these people had to be escorted back into the streets of Shiraz. And the Bab is not going to do this. This is Haji Mubarak. So he received them fresh and innocent and not knowing what was going to happen to them. And then he probably took care of them after they realized, oh my God, I found the promised one. What am I going to do with my life? What must it have been like? 17 people coming through the house, and Khadija Bagum and the mother, and just, can you think of that? Just in April, May, 40 days after the 23rd of May. That's what, and all that happened. 40 days. And that's when he revealed the Qayyumul Asma. He finished on the 40th day. So if all these people came during these 40 days and the Qayyumul Asma was revealed in 40 days, you have to think that whenever a letter of the living came, the Bab would reveal more of the Qayyumul Asma, I'm assuming this is what happened. That's the proof, because what other proof does the manifestation of God have than his word and his person? So they come and they meet the Bab, they have the person, but then they hear the Bab reveal and they have the revelation, it's a two-part thing, So, I don't really want to talk about the meal. You guys can go and read this. I'm in this mood now of the letters of the living and the revelation of Baha'u'llah, of the Bab. So anyway, yes. In the late evening, he leaves and he's dazzled and he's transformed and he returns to his companions. And I just want to see if there's something in the companions that, yes. Okay. So we're going to read this because this is going to link us to the next part. So shortly after sunrise on the 23rd of May, 1844, Mullah Hussein returns to his companions. He obeys the Bab who had told them, don't tell them who I am. They must, one and all, find me independently. So he began to teach classes in the mosque of Il-Khani, and gradually more and more people came to his classes and they just marveled at the spirit and the new things he was saying. And Mullah Hussein came to the Bab's house several times. And Haji Mubarak was the one who went to get Mullah Hussein and bring him. He was the courier of the Bab. He was not just a servant. He was such an important part of the early days of the Babi dispensation and everything having to do with the letters of the living. Haji Mubarak was with Khadija Bagum on the front row, saw everything. And on one of these nights that he was with the Bab told Mullah Hussein, tomorrow, 13 of your companions will arrive. To each of them, extend the utmost loving kindness. Leave them not to themselves, for they have dedicated their lives to the quest of their beloved. Pray to God that he may graciously enable them to walk securely in the path, which is finer than a hair's breadth and keener than a sword. Certain ones among them will be accounted in the sight of God as his chosen and favored disciples. As to others, they will tread the middle way. The fate of the rest will remain undeclared until the hour when all that is hidden shall be made manifest. And we're going to look at that in detail, I hope, in the next, yes, we have enough time. We're going to be able to do that. Great. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about the revelation of the Bab. Now, this chronology, from this point forward, there are two chronologies. There is a chronology of the person of the Bab, what he does, what he says, where he goes, who he meets. And then there is the chronology of his revelation, what he reveals, what stage of revelation it's in, when he reveals it, why he reveals it, who he reveals it to, because we do not know enough about the Bab's revelation. He didn't just reveal the Qayyum al-Asma, and the selections from the writings of the Bab are actually from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tablets. And Nader Saidi wrote this book called The Gate of the Heart, and I am going to mention this as often as I possibly can. Buy this book, read it, drink it, eat it. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing book. So amazing. So 23rd of May, 1844 marks the first stage of the revelation of the Bab. The Bab's revelation is in 3 stages. Now, you know, the Bab is standing at the juncture of the Adamic dispensation and the Babi dispensation. And the Bab is in the middle there, you know? So he has to break the Islamic, he has to make a final break with the Islamic dispensation. He has to annul it. And the Baha'i faith is now the religion. Until the Bab spoke and received his declaration, Islam was the religion of God. Now it's the Baha'i faith. It has become the Baha'i faith. We're still one religion, you know, but it just has been transferred from Islam to the Baha'i faith. And because he does that, he is speaking, he is born and bred Muslim, descended from the Prophet Muhammad, married to a woman who is descended from the Prophet Muhammad. He is among Muslims. He has been a Muslim his entire life. He has prayed as a Muslim his entire life. And now he is bringing a new dispensation, which is going to prepare the way for the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. But he's not just preparing the way for Baha'u'llah, he's breaking the idols, he's breaking the traditions, he's breaking the way they pray, breaking the direction in which they pray, breaking the language, changing the rules, revealing in Persian, you know, so he is really a revolutionary in that sense. And the first stage of the revelation is interpretive. The second is going to be philosophical, and the third is going to be legislative. So the first is going to do basically commentaries on the Quran, hadith, Quran, hadith. Then the second is going to be concepts. And this is when he's going to start using Persian. What is the meaning of the divine unity? What is the meaning of the covenant? What is the meaning? That's the kind of thing. And it's going to be in the philosophical stage. The legislative stage is the bayan, the Persian bayan, the Arabic bayan, the laws. So the first stage of revelation is interpretive, and it lasts from the 23rd of January, 1844 to January, 1846. Why January, 1846? Because that is when he comes back from pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, where he's announced he's the promised one. And he is under house arrest in Shiraz, and then he is forced to leave Shiraz forever and go to Isfahan for several months. That's January 1846. That's why the first stage is until then. And we're going to look at all the writings, the main writings in this stage. So, of course, the main work of this interpretive stage is the Qayyum al-Asma. And this text is very crucial, and it was revealed in honor of Mullah Hussein. The Bab began revealing it on the 23rd of May, and he finished 40 days later, around early July 1844. There are 111 chapters in the Qayyum al-Asma, exactly the same number as in the Quranic Surah of Joseph, the Suri Yusuf. And these 111 chapters are dedicated to interpreting the Surah of Joseph from the vantage point of progressive revelation. And the mode of divine verses is the voice of God in this revelation of the Qayyum al-Asma. And it is no coincidence that it is the Surah of Joseph that marks the declaration of the Bab, because one, the form of the commentary itself is a testament to the station of the Bab. But what I mean by what Dr. Saidi means by that is basically that the name Yusuf is equatable to the term Qayyum, self-subsisting. And the numerical values of both of those letters are equal to basically it's the abjad numerical system of these two words that prove that inside of the Qayyum al-Asma, enshrined in the structure and the words that are used by the Bab, he is actually declaring himself as the promised one through the structure itself of the book. It's very complicated. It's in Gate of the Heart. I did a terrible job explaining it. I apologize, Dr. Saidi. One of the really interesting aspects of the Qayyum al-Asma is the unity between the Bab and his work. Each of the 111 verses contains exactly 42 verses. So 111 chapters of each 42 verses. The number 42 is the value of the word bala, ya, which is what Tahereh had written to the Bab. Am I not your Lord? Ya, bala, bala. And so each of the 111 chapters of the Qayyum al-Asma has a numerical value of 42, which is bala. And so each of the 111 chapters of the Qayyum al-Asma basically yell out to the entire creation, yay, yay, in answer to, am I not your Lord? And so that is another way in which the Babs is declaring that he is a manifestation of God through the Qayyum al-Asma. When I say that the Bab's writings are complicated, I am not exaggerating. They all contain this kind of complexity. They are very difficult to understand. A recurring theme in the Qayyum al-Asma is the theme of the mystery of the Bab and his station. And that's very important because for the first phase, the interpretive phase, no one can know the Bab is the Qayyum. They always say, oh, someone has come, there is a message, there is a youth, there is a new person, there is a new message. Read the Qayyum al-Asma, read his words. But it's not until Barash that we're starting to start talking about the Bab. So why the Bab is mentioned as a secret in the Qayyum al-Asma is because this is the period of keeping him a secret until we can consolidate the covenant, get the 18 letters of the living. Baha'u'llah can accept the cause. He can go on pilgrimage. He can proclaim to the Sheriff of Mecca. He can say he is the promised one in front of the Kaaba. He can come back. He can be confronted by the people in Shiraz. He can go to the masjid in Shiraz and proclaim in front of all of Shiraz that he is the promised one. He can be put under house arrest, and then he can be taken away. All of that has to happen before we can start saying that he's the Bab. He is the one who basically has to say it to people. But before that happens, Baha'u'llah has to accept the faith. He has to go on pilgrimage. Am I talking too fast? Sorry. Apologies. Okay, there are maybe 10 other things I wanted to say about the Qayyum al-Asma, but you can go and find them on the website. This is an actual page of the Qayyum al-Asma held by the British Library. It is in the handwriting of somebody else, not the Bab, but it is very soon after the declaration. And we have something very interesting here. Now, the Babs. Now, we do not have copies of these, but one of the first acts of the Bab after the declaration and after the revelation of the Qayyum al-Asma, so around July 1844, was to write tablets to 3 leaders of Iraq and Persia: Sheikh Muhammad Hassan al-Najafi of Najaf, Iraq, Muhammad Shah, and Haji Mirza Aqazi, the sovereign and the prime minister of Persia. So the Shah of Persia and his prime minister. So there are no translations for either of these 3 epistles, and they are mentioned here because they are very symbolic of the Bab's. He wasted no time in writing to the king of his own country and the prime minister of his own country. Now there is another I think, and this is the last one for this part. This is the last little thing I'm going to tell you. It's very, very short. There is if anybody can correct me, I would be really happy. Simin, if you can correct me, please. Can you read this in Persian? The hidden treasured epistle. I'm going to make a Safiye imak zune. I don't know how you say it.
Safiye makhzune.
Thank you. So this is
Makhzune.
perfect. This is called the hidden treasured epistle, and it was written after the declaration in that same sort of time period. And it's a compilation of 14 prayers and tablets of visitation. And one tablet is visitation, is related to the night of the declaration. If you go to the website, you can listen to a short excerpt that is from this writing, and you're going to be very excited because you actually all know this one. It is a very well-known prayer called, I adjure thee by thy might, oh my God. You know that prayer, right? I adjure thee by thy might. That prayer is from Safiye Imagsuni. Isn't that cool? All right. So, friends, I am having technical difficulties, and so Jeremiah is going to share his screen, and he's going to go down to the images for us, and I'm going to keep...
While you're transitioning, I have a question for you.
Yes. Go ahead.
So I don't have Amira with me because she's that person to ask for Arabic pieces, but I'm just asking.
Oh, yeah, wonderful, yeah.
You said Bala and 40, I'm sorry, the number.
Yeah.
42, thank you. 42.
Oh, hey, John, can I ask you something? Are you going to ask me about numerology and numbers and stuff like that?
No, I'm not going to get that deep. I'm actually just asking because in Farsi and Arabic, Bala and Bala are a little bit different. I'm just asking, is it Bala like Shaytun Bala, or is it Bala like Khuda Bala?
You have to ask Simin if which one of Bala or Bala is yay.
Actually, ballet. Ballet is yay, yes, ballet. But bala is a disaster or disease or something. Okay. So ballet.
But bala, there's also
and then there is bala, which is up. Yeah. Bala point, top and bottom.
All right.
So this is ballet.
Yeah.
Is no, ballet is ballet. Yes.
Okay, so the word is ballet.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, there. You can see my my source for that story because it's in Gate of Understanding, and I copied that directly from Nader Saidi. So let's just put a cap on that because we're going to talk all night on this, and none of us have.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure because I know as a person who's not a native speaker myself, I don't know how to say every word.
No, it's hard.
Correctly.
It's hard.
But that because I was just confused, I was wondering, but for future purposes, maybe we can get that because I'm very intrigued. Yes, numerology is cool and stuff like that, but I meant just intrigued by that, and it'd be cool.
I can look. I have a copy of the book. I'll look in it. Okay, let's get started with the letters of the living because we don't have much time left. And by the way, you guys can ask questions as I go. You can. I know I talk very fast, and I tend to but you can unmute yourself and ask questions if you want. So now the letters of the living, from June to July 1844 is when the letters of the living find the Bab, all of them, including Tahere, who is not even present in Persia, right? So late June 1844, Mullah Ali Bastami and his 12 companions arrive in Shiraz. And he confronts Mullah Hussein and says, we know you know who he is, tell us. And they began to find them themselves. Now that's the next vignette is in July 1844. Mullah Ali Bastami has his first encounter with the Bab. So he's arrived and he's on his third night in seclusion and he's wrapped in prayer and he has a vision. A light appears before his eyes and begins moving, and he follows the light until he meets the Bab. And he awakes and he runs out of joy. And he says, I know who he is. He's guided me here. And so he goes to the Bab's house, and his meeting is exactly similar in every single way to Mullah Hussein's meeting. the dinner, the ablutions, the prayer, the revelation, the proofs, the dinner, all of that. It's very, very similar. So he is the second person to accept the message of the Bab. And you're just going to have to accept this. He's the second person to accept the message of the Bab, but he's the fourth letter of the living. There you go. Because the other two letters of the living are Mullah Hussein, who arrived with his brother and his nephew. So Mullah Hussein and his brother and nephew are the first, second, and third letters of the living. Mullah Ali Bastami arrived after them, and he's the second to officially believe. But because the nephew and the brother arrived first, and they're eventually going to become letters of the living, they are the second and third letters of the living. So now, the remaining letters of the living enroll in the 40 days following the revelation. The 16th letter of the living was Mirza Muhammad Ali Ghazvini, Tahir's brother-in-law, and true to his word, he conveyed Tahir's message, which contained that same structure of the Qayyumul Asma, of the 42 verses in the Bale, am I not your Lord? Verily I am, yea, Bale. She was connected to the Bab very intuitively, because her saying that Bale was like before the Bab even revealed the Qayyumul Asma that has 42 chapters that have the same numerical value as Bale. So she is very special. And Qudus, of course, is the last letter of the living, but the first in rank. And he walks up to the Bab in his disheveled travel gear, stained, disheveled travel gear. And he comes up to Mullah Hussein and he embraces him and he says, have you attained your goal? And Mullah Hussein tries to calm him down, and Qudus, 22 years old, he's very, very, very quiet, very, very, very modest. He's from Barfurush, and he says, you're trying to hide him from me, and I can see he's right there. That's him right there. I know, I can recognize him by his gait. I confidently testify that none beside him, whether in the East or in the West, can claim to be the truth. None can manifest the power and majesty that radiate from this holy person. Do you see why Qudus is the last, but the first in rank? I mean, do you see how he recognized the Bab by his gait? And he said, I'm laying my life down for you. I know you are the one, you're the one. I can see it by the way that you walk. And Mullah Hussein was entering his house and he was like, oh, this is a nice house. This is good news for my search. Oh, this is a very nice family. Oh, this is a very nice dinner. Oh, I'm going to give him a test. It just shows that spiritual quests are different. The way that Tahiri recognized the Bab, she never even met him. She saw him in a dream and she accepted him in a dream. And then she wrote him a poem that was supposed to be recited to him. I mean, who does that? Can you imagine? Here, I have a message for you. You're going to go recite this to Simin. You have to say this, and then after that, you have to say that. What? I'm not reciting a poem to someone I don't know. That's Tahir. And then this is Qudus. Qudus recognized him by his gait. Every single letter of the living recognized the Bab in their own way. And it's amazing to go into details and really see the difference, like see them fall in love and see them discover. So the next story is also like a next section really is after July 1844, the Bab's missions for the letters of the living. So yes, they found the promised one, but these letters of the living, they all have a mission. And so the Bab entrusts Mullah Hussein with a tablet for Baha'u'llah. So Mullah Hussein's mission is to go to Tehran and find a secret. That's literally what the Bab told him. Go to Tehran, a secret is enshrined in that city. And what? Mullah Hussein, the way he found the Bab, that's how he found Baha'u'llah. And it's an amazing story. And you will hear it next month in the story of the life of Baha'u'llah. So that's the mission of Mullah Hussein. The next story is the Mullah Ali Bastami's mission. Now he, the fourth letter of the living, but the second one to believe, his mission is amazing. He is to go to Iraq and proclaim the message among the Sheikhis. He is the one who brings the Qayyumul Asma to Karbila, so that Tahereh can find it and can open it and translate it into Persian and find inside the Qayyumul Asma the verse she heard in her dream. That's Mullah Ali Bastami's mission. Now, the next story is the tasks to each of the remaining letters of the living. So each letter of the living had a separate mission, a separate place that they had to go. They were dispersed. Some went back to the regions of their birth. Some went otherwhere. Some went other places. Some he just, he said simple things like go and speak to your father, or, and then we don't have like what's interesting is that all of the letters to the letters of the living, the tablet to the first, the second, the third, the 17th, the 18th letter of the living, they are not translated. There's only 2 of them that are authoritatively translated by the World Center. So one day maybe somebody will translate them. So the next story is the address of the Bab to the letters of the living. And I'm only going to read the first few lines because you all know this, and you can go to the chronology and read it if you want. And the address of the Bab to the letters of the living is, of course, Pilgrim Notes. It is not a revelation. He did not reveal this. These are words remembered by the letters of the living and that were put in the Dawnbreakers by Nabil. But it begins this way. Oh, my beloved friends, you are the bearers of the name of God in this day. You have been chosen as the repositories of his mystery. It behooves each one of you to manifest the attributes of God and to exemplify by your deeds and words the signs of his righteousness, his power and glory. The very members of your body must bear witness to the loftiness of your purpose, the integrity of your life, the reality of your faith, and the exalted character of your devotion. The Bab outlawed smoking. He outlawed a lot of things. The Bab's dispensation was extremely pure. The Bab wrote pentacles and wrote these round dariyas for the women because the Bab was very his standards were very, 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 very high because he had to ensure that the maximum percentage of Babis would accept Baha'u'llah. So everything he reveals is for that purpose. He has 6 years left to live. He is going to die in 6 years. He knows this. He has to go through the interpretive stage of his revelation, the philosophical stage of his revelation, the legislative state of his revelation. He has to get the message to Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah has to accept the message. Baha'u'llah has to go proclaim. He has all these things to do, and he only has 6 years to do them. And the fate of all of humanity rests in his young hands. He is so young. He's 25. Remember when you were 25? It's like, what am I going to eat tonight? And this manifestation of God had to basically save humanity in the next 6 years of his life. That is the life of the Bab. Because everything that happens before the first 24 years of his life, then he turns 25, and then the countdown starts because he has 6 years left to live. We're going to skip Jeremiah, the last instructions to Mullah Hussein. We have to skip that. And we're going to also skip the next one that's in a period of intense activity in the house of the Bab, because it's literally one line that says that it's a period of intense activity in the house of the Bab, so we can skip that. And now we're going to go to the section that's called Hurufi Hai. That is how you say letters of the living in Arabic and Persian. Hurufi Hai, letters of the living. I am only concerned with the Bab in this chronology. And the only exception I'm going to make in this entire chronology is, there's 2 exceptions. One is I talked about Khadija Begum because I love her with every fiber of my being. So I dedicated one part to her at the beginning. And at the end, after the martyrdom of the Bab, there's a very moving section about what happened to Khadija Begum, what happened to Fatima Begum, because we started with the Bab with these 2 women who adored him, his mother and his wife. And at the end, he's killed. And I never sat right with me to end the story of the Bab at that point, because then what are you really saying? The Bab is martyred, and then his body is torn, and then it's just carried from place to place until it's buried. I was not okay ending the chronology like that. So I decided to end with Fatima Bagum and Khadija Bagum. Because I thought you end and you start with these two women who adored him. And I thought that would be really, and I'm a woman historian, there's not that many of them, and I really care about the women. So the other exception I'm going to make is with the letters of the living. So we can go to the next one that says the name of the living one. This is a little bit mystical, but I really want to say this because I want you to understand how complicated the dispensation of the Bab is. It was very, 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 very hard to read, to do this for me, because I am really good with dates and places and people and doing designs and drawing stuff. I am really, really bad with really theological stuff and mystical stuff. So it's very hard for me to understand a lot of this. Took me a long time to write these mystical parts. And the letters of the living are mystical because they're not just 18 people. They have very, 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 very specific stations. And I'm going to explain to you what they mean in terms of the Bab's dispensation. So according to the Bab in the Persian Bayan, which is revealed at the end of his life, the letters of the living form a word because letters form words, duh. And we have 18 letters, so obviously we have a word. And the word is the name of the living one. He further explains in the Persian Bayan that the letters of the living are the nearest ones to God, who by their actions guide the believers. The Bab also states that through the letters of the living, now listen, follow this, through the letters of the living, God initiated the creation of the Bayan, which is not going to be revealed for another 6 years, so keep following. And in that mystical sense, they represent the lights of faithfulness that have always and will always prostrate themselves in front of the celestial throne. So, 1, they form a word, the name of the living one. 2, they guide the believers by their actions. 3, they initiated the creation of the Bayan. 4, they represent the lights of faithfulness that always prostrate in front of God. There is a quote here, and I'm going to let you go and discover it. I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm going to introduce you to the letters of the living. The letters of the living were individuals from a variety of backgrounds. They hailed from every corner of Persia, from south and northwestern Khorasan, from Shiraz, from Yazd, from Ghazvin, from Azerbaijan, from Mazandaran, and they included one Indian from Lucknow, India. They were of different socioeconomic backgrounds, different educational and theological backgrounds, vastly different leadership capabilities, and they had different degrees of commitment to the Bab and the Babi faith. The majority of the letters of the living remained active Babis, except for a small handful who chose not to stay at the forefront of the Babi faith, and most of them fell as martyrs during and in the 2 years following the ministry of the Bab. Most of them died right after the Bab. 10 of them died. The Bab also revealed a tablet for each of the letters of the living, only 4 of which have been translated, 2 authoritatively translated, and 2 provisionally translated. You can find all the links to the translations of the letters of the Bab from the tablets of the Bab to the letters of the living in the chronology. I give you the links for the provisional translations and for the full translations. So you can go there. Okay, now the next section is letters of the living, title and theological statement. I'm not done. That's not just what the letters of the living are. The Bab uses 2 terms to refer to these letters of the living, the first disciples. He calls them sabikun, plural, or sabikin, singular, meaning forerunners or forerunner. And he also calls them hurufihai. This term, hurufihai, this is a term that exists nowhere else but in the Babi dispensation. The Bab invented this term, this theological station, the meaning, that whole, everything that the letters of the living represent, the Bab invented. This is completely new. The Bab used a mystical term, nukti, point, to refer to the manifestations of God. He's the primal point. And this point is the primal will of God. The point is the first mark a pen puts on the paper. The very first thing that we have in the Quran is Bismillah. Right, Bismillah, you have a dot before the B in Arabic. The B is like a horizontal C with a dot underneath. That dot in the Quran is the first point of the Quran, and the manifestation of God, like the point, which is the first mark that a pen makes on paper. The point is the very first will of God, is the manifestation of God. And if the Bab is a point, what is the next stage? It's a letter. And after the letter, it's a word, right? So the Bab is the point, the letters of the living are the letters of the living. Together, they form the name of the living one. Also, and this is the last thing, there's a couple of other things there, but you can go to the chronology and read it for yourselves, because I really want to get to the sort of the little biographies and the prophecies and things like that. So the Bab and the 18 letters of the living together total 19. They comprise the first Vahid of the Babi religion, meaning unity. They're the first 19 members of the Babi religion. And the Bab is going to send all of the letters of the living out and ask them to send him all of their converts. And they're grouped 19 by 19. There are lists of them. The Bab was very, very, very organized. Everywhere they went, Mullah Hussein included, they would write down the names of the people who would, and he would compile them. And yeah, you remember when he used to say to Khadija Bagum, these are the accounts of the people of the world, that book that he was working on, that wasn't an accounting book. I wonder what that was. Okay, so we're going to skip the prophecies we're going to go straight, Jeremiah, to the short biographies of the letters of the living, and we're going to start with the first one, Mullah Hussein Bushrui. And these biographies are not very short, they're quite long. So I'm going to give you the highlights, and you can go and read them at your leisure. I worked very, very hard on these. I gave you biographies for all 18. So Mullah Hussein is the gate of the gate, Jinabi Babul Bab, the gate of the gate. He was born in 1813 near Bushrui in South Khorasan, and he studied Islamic theology and jurisprudence and became a mushtahid at the age of 21 in 1834, and then he became a sheikhi. So then he went to Karbala, and he went on missions for him, and then he became a Babi when he found the Bab on the 23rd of May, 1844. And he was a well-respected mushtahid. So he was a leader, an exemplary proclaimer of the cause. He traveled a lot. He confirmed people in their faith. He found new believers. He was in contact with many prominent clerics and government officials, including Muhammad Shah. When he was in Isfahan, he spoke in the pulpits of all the mosques of the city and publicly announced that the Bab was the 12th Imam, the Qa'im, the promised one of Islam. He displayed the writings of the Bab. He read from them in the pulpits of these mosques. He went from Isfahan to Kashan, to Qom, to Tehran. He found Baha'u'llah. By the spring of 1845, Mullah Hussein was in Shiraz, but opposition was very violent, and the Bab told him to go to Mashhad, and he continued proclaiming in Mashhad, and he walked all the way from Mashhad, 1,400 kilometers, 850 miles, to go see the Bab, and spent Nowruz 1848 with him. And that is when the Bab gave him guidance about the Badasht conference. It is believed by historians, because right after Mullah Hussein leaves, Badasht happens. And then at the end of the Badasht conference is when the Bab sends him his green turban and gives him a new name. Mullah Hussein is now called Sayyid Ali, and he wears the turban of the Bab, and they get pushed out of the town of Bar Furush. And there is an uprising in Mazandaran called the Uprising of the Fort of Sheikh Tabarsi. Between October 1848 and May 1849, Baha'u'llah visits the fort, and Mullah Hussein recognizes his station. Mullah Hussein had seen Baha'u'llah one or two times before, well, twice at least. Once in his home in Iran, in Tehran, when he was walking to go to Azerbaijan to see the Bab, and he was like very casual, hello, hi, I'm going to walk and see the Bab, and oh, I'm back, I'm going back to Mashhad, and I'll see you at, Badasht. Or so they went to Badasht, and they were in, he was not in Badasht, I don't think, because it was Qudus and Tahir. So he never made it to Badasht. He was in Mashhad, I think, when Badasht happened. And so his martyrdom was really, really, really difficult. I think I'm going to let you read his martyrdom. I've had this feeling, this spiritual feeling, that it's going to bring us all down if I go into details about how he died. So I'm not going to say that. But he did his last words to Qudus were, before he passed away in a horrible, horrible way. He said, "May my life be a ransom for you. Are you well pleased with me?" Look at that sweetness. Kitabi Ikan, Baha'u'llah specifically speaks to the station of Mullah Hussein. Among them was Mullah Hussein, who became the recipient of the effulgent glory of the Son of Divine Revelation. But for him, God would not have been established upon the Sea of Mercy, nor ascended to the throne of the eternal glory. The Babul Bab. So the second of the letter of the living, we know a lot less about him. We only know that he was Mullah Hussein's younger brother, and he was killed at Sheikh Tabarsi. And there is a provisional translation by Nejati Alkan, a great scholar of the Baha'i faith, that you can read. And you can go to the link on my website and read it. The third letter of the living was Mirza Muhammad Bakiri Bushrui. He was the nephew of Mullah Hussein, and he was killed in the spring of 1849. We know nothing else about him. The fourth letter of the living was Mullah Ali Bastami. He was born in a farming village in northwestern Khorasan, and he began his religious studies in Bastam. So he became a sheikhi. He was with Sayyid Kazim in Karbala. Like I said, he went to Iraq and brought the Qayyumul Asma to Iraq and to Tahrir. He proclaimed in Iraq. He was imprisoned. He was declared a heretic. He was sent to Baghdad to stand trial. He was sent to forced labor in Istanbul, and he died in 1846. Mullah Ali Bastami holds the honor of being the very first martyr of the Baha'i dispensation. And there is a long write-up on him on the website, which I really summarized. But we have not much time left, so I'd like to go on to the fifth letter of the living, Mullah Khuda Bakhshi Kuchani. Now, I can't see the images that Jeremiah is projecting, but each of them should be, if I remember correctly, the tablet of the Bab to that letter of the living, and then an image of the city that they were born in, where they're from. Mullah Khuda Bakhshi Kushani, later named Mullah Ali Razi, was born in Kuchan and was a sheikhi also. He traveled with Mullah Ali Bastami. He was one of the 13. So basically, there's four separate groups of letters of the living. This is how I think of it, to make it really simple. The first three are Mullah Hussein, his nephew, his brother. They came together. Then after them, there's the 13, right? The 13 are Mullah Ali Bastami and his 12 companions. And then the 17th is Tahireh. She stands on her own because she declared by letter. And the 18th is Qudus, and he stands alone because he recognized him by his gait. So if a letter of the living is not Mullah Hussein, Tahireh, or Qudus, or the brother of Mullah Hussein, or the nephew of Mullah Hussein, they are among the 13 people that came in a group all together with Mullah Ali Bastami. I hope that's a nice thing that makes it easier to remember. So anyway, who are we talking about? Yes, Mullah Khuda Bakhshi Kushani, the most complicated name. He went back to Iraq and disappeared. He stopped being an active Babi and fell into obscurity. You remember the thing I just read to you about Baha'u'llah was talking about how some of these letters of the living, they're going to shine, and some of them are going to just, according to their station. This is one of those who just went into the background and just disappeared. The sixth letter of the living, Mullah Hassani Bajistani. He's quite interesting, actually. He is one of the very few letters of the living that were left alive after the martyrdom of the Bab. He visited, oh wait, hold on. I thought there was something else. He settled in Khorasan. He visited Baha'u'llah in Baghdad and confided in him that he'd lost his faith in the Bab. And yeah, oh no, that's not the one. No, he never returned to the Babi faith. He was never really active afterwards, the sixth letter of the living. The seventh letter of the living was Sayyid Hussein Yazdi, and he was born in Yazd, as his name indicates. The Bab had told him to go to Kashan, and he spent 3 days in Kashan. And when the Bab came to Kashan, and he had already told Sayyid Husseini Yazdi, go ahead to Kashan. When the Bab got to Kashan, Sayyid Husseini Yazdi served as his amanuensis, his secretary, his taking dictation. And so Sayyid Hussein is the letter of the living, and his brother is not. His brother is Sayyid Hassan. And so his brother and him, so the letter of the living, Sayyid Hussein, they are the only two Babis allowed to go with the Bab to Makku and Chirik. And he continues to be the Bab's amanuensis. When the Bab goes to Tabriz for trial, Sayyid Hussein goes with him. On the 8th of July, 1850, the night before his martyrdom, the Bab is speaking to Sayyid Hussein, the letter of the living, when they interrupt him. And then the Bab is shot, and then he returns to his conversation. He is returning to the conversation with the seventh letter of the living, Sayyid Hussein. That's the man. He's the man. That's the one. We always say, oh, his amanuensis, but it wasn't his amanuensis. It was a letter of the living, Sayyid Hussein, who was his amanuensis for the last 4 years of his life. Sorry, I'm speaking so fast. So 2 years later, after the botched attempt on the life of the Bab, Sayyid Hussein was rounded up as a prisoner, and he was imprisoned with Baha'u'llah in the Siachal. Baha'u'llah would then have the revelation, the revelation from the Maiden of Heaven in the Siachal, and he was executed, and he died as a martyr. The eighth letter of the living is Mirza Muhammad Razi Khani Yazdi, also from Yazd. We have two from Yazd. Bravo, Yazd. And but unfortunately, he was met with hostility when he went back to Yazd, so he recanted his faith. The ninth letter is a living is, oh, wow. I one day hope someone learns more about him. His name is Sayyidi Hindi, and he is Indian from India, from Lucknow, from a small shaky community in Lucknow. He was sent back to India by the Bab as his mission, and we lost contact with him after he arrived in India. We do not know what happened to him. So we don't know. But I just love that we have an Indian letter of the living. I did not know that. I admit that. I did not know that. The 10th letter of the living is Mullah Muhammadi Hui, comes from Hui, which is in the area of Azerbaijan. It's a city that the Bab is going to go through, I think, around 1846, 1847. Mullah Muhammadi Hui, he's going to join Mullah Hussein when Mullah Hussein raises the black standard. And he died as a martyr in the Fort Tabarsi. The 11th letter of the living, so, part of this entire middle group that all came with Mullah Ali Bastami, the 13 companions, his name is Mullah Jalil Urumi, and he is from Urumiye, I think. Yeah, Urumiye, Azerbaijan. We're going to talk a lot about Urumiye when we get to it, but if you don't make it to that section, Urumiye is where the portrait of the Bab was painted. The only copy of the portrait of the Bab that we have was painted while he was in Urumiye. So that's kind of interesting. He was actually not a Muslim. He was a follower of a very minority, very mystical religion called Yarsanism, which follows the teachings of a 14th century Sultan Sahak. And he became a Muslim, and then he became a Shaykhi. And when the letters of the living dispersed, he went back to Iraq. And when Tahir was extradited to Persia in the spring of 1847, Mullah Jalili Urumi was one of the many Babis that guarded Tahirih all the way back to Ghazvin. And he was there when she enrolled thousands of people in the faith in a village next to Hamadan, and when she just taught the faith to all these people. And he died on the same day as Mullah Hussein in the Sheikh Tabarsi. Now, the 12th letter of the living is Mullah Ahmad Ibdal Maraghi from Maraghi, Azerbaijan. We have like 3 hands of the cause from Azerbaijan. He became a sheikhi. He was also martyred in the fort of Sheikh Tabarsi. The 13th letter of the living was Mullah Bakir Tabrizi. He was with Tahirih in Iraq. He was part of the large band of Babis that protected her when she returned. For 3 months, they protected her and they were with her when she enrolled thousands of people. He is the recipient of one of the Bab's most important tablets, known simply as Tablet to Bakir, but it holds significant pronouncements by the Bab and is extolled as a singularly important tablet, and it is regarded as the spiritual will and testament of the Bab. In this tablet, the Bab indicates to Mullah Bakir that he would meet him whom God shall make manifest. So he does meet Baha'u'llah in Tehran, in Baghdad, and in Akka. I love Mullah Bakir. I love him. He's amazing. He was a staunch defender of the faith, and he was allowed to, oh my gosh, I just love him. He's my favorite. He was allowed to live out the rest of his life in Istanbul, and he claims the honor of being the only letter of the living to become a Baha'i. What's so special? And he died of old age in Istanbul in 1881. He was the last remaining letter of the living. And yeah.
And can you please tell me the number again? Which number is he, Mr. Bakir?
His full name is Mullah Bakir Tabrizi from Tabriz, and he is the 13th letter of the living.
Thank you, ma'am.
He's an extraordinary person. I really go to the website and read the rest of what I wrote about him, because there's a lot that I didn't read. I want to finish on time. I'm very mindful of time. The 14th letter of the living was Mullah Yusufi Ad-Dibili from also Azerbaijan. So I think that's now the 4th letter of the living from Azerbaijan. He was very renowned for his learning. He taught all through Azerbaijan after he returned. He had proclamation activities in Yazd, in Kerman, in Ghazvin, in Milan, in Tabriz. He went to Sheikh Tabarsi, and he was martyred in Sheikh Tabarsi. But he was a great teacher of the cause, and he is the 14th letter of the living, Mullah Yusuf-i Ardebili. Now, the 15th letter of the living is now related to Tahirih. He is okay. So his name is Mirza Hadi Ghazvini. He's from Ghazvin. He is Tahirih's cousin. And he was a covenant breaker after. The 16th letter of the living was Tahirih's sister's husband, but he is also her cousin. So Mirza Muhammad Ali Ghazvini is the cousin of Tahirih and her brother-in-law, the husband of her sister. He was very close with Tahirih when she was in Karbala. He delivered the message of Tahirih to the Bab. And he was martyred also in Sheikh Tabarsi. Now, the 17th letter of the living is Tahirih. Tahirih is such an iconic figure for Baha'is. I'm going to try and pick out just a few things to tell you that you may not know. And then I'm going to keep it very short, because we all know Tahirih. One of the things that's really interesting about Tahirih is her name is actually Fatime, Remember I was telling you that in the life of the Bab, the name Fatimeh comes up again and again and again and again and again. This is another case. Her name is Fatimeh Barahani, and she was known by Salma, after the Prophet Muhammad's most outspoken wife. In her nickname, she was given the nicknames of Zarin Taj, meaning crown of gold, Zakiyeh, meaning the virtuous, Kuratulain, meaning the solace of the eyes. She was just an extraordinary scholar, an accomplished poet, a woman of uncommon intuition. She intuitively recognized the station of the Bab, intuitively recognized the station of Baha'u'llah, and intuitively recognized the station of Abdul Baha as a 5-year-old child, which we will cover in part 2 of the chronology of Baha'u'llah next month. She was unbeatable in debate and exceedingly beautiful. She spent 13 years in Iraq with her husband when they were first married. They had 3 children there. She became a sheikhi in Karbala, came back to Ghazvin, left Ghazvin, went back to Karbala, stayed in Karbala, taught in Karbala, dreamt of the Bab, wrote him a letter accepting him in her dream. Then she gave lectures and statements. She challenged every single cleric in Iraq against her, in Karbala, Kazimain, and Baghdad. Nobody would ever debate her. They could not kill her. They could not execute her. They wanted to, but they couldn't, because she was part of such a renowned family in Iran. So they had to extradite her. They had to kick her out of Iran. And this is how Tahereh thought. She figured, well, they're kicking me out of Iran, but they're not telling me I have to arrive in Iran at a certain date. So I'm going to travel as slowly as I possibly can. That's Tahereh for you. So she was on a howdah that was opened, and she was proclaiming the name of the Bab as she was being walked on the donkey, like between Iraq and Iran, proclaiming the Bab. She went to a village near Hamadan, and 1,000 people became Babis. Then she taught Jews in Hamadan. I have a friend called Behin Newport, who is the great-great-great-granddaughter of a woman that Tahereh taught the faith to in Hamadan. And her grandchildren are 7th generation Baha'is. That's from the time of the Bab, yo. That's Tahereh, the people that she taught. And this woman, Behin Newport, she enrolled thousands of people into the faith in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where she lived. She was an extremely famous teacher of the cause. So see how Baha'i history is always relevant to the present day. So anyway, when she got back, this is one of the things I just think is like, we don't really pay enough attention to this. She dissolved her marriage with her husband. When she got back, her father and her husband, for the years she was in Iraq, she was teaching the faith, challenging clerics, having open debates, writing, teaching, educating. She was free. They extradite her and send her back to Iraq with all these Babis who are like, yay, go, Tahereh, teach, that's awesome, that's great. Then they get to Ghazvin, and the father and the husband want to imprison her. And she was free in Iraq. She was in danger, but she was free. Now she's in Ghazvin, and they all want to they want her to recant. They want her to say she's not a Babi. They ridicule the Bab. And she looks at them and she's like, these are not my people anymore. So she dissolves her marriage with her husband. And she says, she calls him an arrogant and presumptuous kinsman. She said, if you really wanted to be a faithful mate and companion to me, you would have hastened to meet me in Karbala. You would have on foot guided my howdah all the way to Ghazvin if you were a faithful husband. I would, while journeying with you, have roused you from your sleep and heedlessness, and I would have shown you the way of truth. But this was not to be. 3 years have elapsed since our separation. Neither in this world nor in the next can I ever be associated with you. I have cast you out of my life forever. Babis were not these sweet, mild-speaking, no, they were revolutionaries. They had fire in their blood. Nothing could stop them from talking. She disenfranchised herself from her husband and her father. And look what happened to her. She was the leader at Badasht. She was mistake not. Yes, we are all equal in the Baha'i faith, but there are leaders. You know, when the Bab was in Azerbaijan, who were the leaders of the Babi community? They were Baha'u'llah, Mullah Hussein, Qudus, and Tahireh, a woman. They were the 4 prominent leaders. And she was a leader. And you know, that whole, there's so much. Baha'u'llah rescued her from Ghazvin, cloak and dagger. You know, if you watch that Amazon Prime series, Jack Ryan, the way that Baha'u'llah rescued Tahireh from Ghazvin is like Jack Ryan, CIA, FBI, Interpol stuff. Like he told them, go to this place, go to that place, then write the letter, then deliver the letter, then come, then wait, then at the appointed time, then come, then horses be waiting for you. You get them here, you come here at this time, they're the first ones in. And then that's how they followed his instructions, detailed instructions, word for word. They stole her from her family's house, brought her to the house of Baha'u'llah. She went to Badasht, then she was imprisoned. I gave a 2-part talk on Tahireh where I gave a lot of things that I never knew about Tahireh from, I think, 73 different sources. And it's on the Clearwater website. And I really, it's not because I'm giving it, it's because of the information that's in it that comes from a lot of new female historians. I really encourage you to go there. And then I mentioned the books and get the books also. So we're going to, oh, wow, that's really long. So we're just, oh, wow, that's like 5 pages. Okay. The biography of Tahireh is 5 pages, guys, with like, I don't know how many quotes. So now just Qudus is the last letter of the living. I'm going to finish right on time. I promise, Jeremiah. So Qudus, instantly recognized the Bab by his gait, as we saw. Went with the Bab on pilgrimage. He was the only one chosen to go with the Bab on pilgrimage, and he was accompanied by Haji Mubarak, my favorite. And he is the one who delivered the Bab's tablet to the Sheriff of Mecca, along with a volume of the Bab's writings. We're going to see that in part 6, so don't worry. We're going to cover that in detail. He was really persecuted. Their beards were burned, I think. And their noses pierced and the string pulled through their nose when they got back after pilgrimage, and they were just really beaten and kicked out of the city. And then he went to Badasht, and he was the leader of Badasht. And that whole thing between Qudus and Tahireh was engineered by Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah said, okay, Qudus, you represent the conservative Babis. Tahireh, you represent the revolutionary Babis. We're going to pretend like you're not talking to each other. And then Tahireh, you're going to write him a letter inviting him to your garden, and you're going to refuse. And Tahireh is going to insist. And then you're going to say, the messenger, we're going to cut his neck off. And then Tahireh is going to appear unveiled. Now, the whole unveiled part, I don't know if Baha'u'llah told her or if she decided. I have a feeling, knowing Tahireh, she's the one who came up with that. And during the siege of Fort Tabarsi, he was martyred. And it was just it was awful. The whole Sheikh Tabarsi thing was just really awful, really, really awful, because it was really a betrayal and hundreds of people were killed. And Baha'u'llah recounted the martyrdom of Qudus to Nabil by saying, by the testimony of Baha'u'llah, that heroic youth who was still on the threshold of his life was subject to such tortures and suffered such agonies, such a death as even Jesus had not faced in the hour of his greatest agony. So they just desecrated his body. And when the Bab heard what happened to Qudus and Mullah Hussein and the hundreds of Babis at Fort Tabarsi, he stopped revelation for 5 months. 5 months, the Bab refused to take revelation from God and sat there in a full state of grief. And I'm going to cover that in part 11 in Chirik, the Grievous Mountain. That's very, very, very touching. And I know it's, but I just want to say the station of Qudus, he should by no means be considered of having reached the station of a prophet. His station was no doubt a very exalted one. This is a letter from Shoghi Effendi, far above that of any of the letters of the living, including the first letter, Mullah Hussein. Qudus reflected more than any of the disciples of the Bab the light of his teachings. I want to just finish with a letter from the House of Justice about Qudus, about his station. And the House of Justice says it may be helpful to consider that in the dispensation of the Bab, Qudus is referred to as the last point, and the last name of God is identified, as pointed out in God Passes By, with one of the messengers charged with imposture mentioned in the Quran, and is one of the 2 witnesses into whom the spirit of life of God must enter, as attested by Abdul Baha in some answered question. Yet in spite of these sublime stations, he is not regarded as an independent manifestation of God. Thank you.
It was so beautiful today, all that you went through. Thank you,
Oh.
Violetta.
Well, I have no merit at all. Baha'i history practically writes itself. I swear, Baha'i history is so amazing. I just sit it there on my computer and I just put my fingers on the keyboard, and then I look up 4 hours later and it's all written itself. That's how powerful Baha'i history is. I have no merit or credit.
Go get some sleep.
Okay, you guys. Tomorrow.
What Peter said, yes.
You're
We thank you all who
wonderful.
joined
You
us.
need to sleep. Take care of yourself.
Yes.
Thank you so much
Again,
for coming, everybody. That's so nice to see you.
And please remember, everyone, where you can find the material. We're talking on the Firm Foundation website, the Desert Roads Baha'i Institute website, as well as clearwaterbaha'is.org.
Okay.
For all your questions, please hold on to them for tomorrow. We're going to be back 1
Okay.
p.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Violetta.